Welcome everyone to episode 18 of HR Leaders Live, the show where we discuss the future of work with today's most innovative and successful people leaders. My name is Chris Rainey, co-founder of HRD Leaders and host of the HR Leaders podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Jill Katz, CHRO at Symbol HR, and Matt Burns, Chief HR Officer over at YISC. Today's special guest is Claude Silva. Claude is the Chief Heart Officer, so that's a habit, at VaynerMedia. Welcome to the show, Claude. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Awesome to be here.
Nice to have you back.
Love to see the guitars in the back there.
I wish I could play them though, to be honest. So that's mainly for my business partner, Shane. I'm more of the hockey, the DJ, the ice hockey, the DJ, and the dancer. So those are my sort of hidden talents. So as well.
Well, that, and then Matt has surfboards behind him up there in Canada.
That's true.
So
it's true. Can you surf though, Matt? I didn't know that Canadians surf.
It's colder.
A lot colder in there. Claude, for our listeners that haven't come across you before, give our listeners a little bit of a background about yourself and your journey to where we are today.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. So my name is Claude Silva. I am the Chief Heart Officer here at VaynerMedia, a company that has been founded and run by Gary Vaynerchuk, who is a very well-known and wonderful CEO, salesman, entrepreneur, celebrity. I came into this role in a very roundabout way. I've always been a champion of people, a coach, a player coach, and was a strategist for an extremely long time at some very large global agencies. And while I was building strategies and creating strategies for a lot of the famous global brands that we can all find in Walmart or Boots, I had this other job, which was just making people feel good and listening to people and creating strong cultures within the teams I was on or the teams that I was able to touch. And one thing led to another. When I came and joined VaynerMedia in May of 14, it became very obvious to Gary quickly that my passion was people, and I was able to bring people together to do hard work, build resiliency, but with a lot of heart. So one thing led to another, and I left the account strategy side, and I came more into what is normally called HR. I changed the department to people and experience, and I get to work for 800 people on a daily basis.
Amazing. I remember the first day that I saw the video posted on YouTube where Gary introduced you to the business as the Chief Heart Officer.
It was a crazy day. It was
a crazy day, right? Amazing. So I know you're probably sick of people asking you this question, Claude, but what is a Chief Heart Officer?
I'm not sick of it because
I'm only joking. I'm being sarcastic. I'm only joking.
Yeah, I love hearing what people think it is.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the fun part for me. So we think of HR, and I put HR in quotes, as heart here. We think of paying attention to each and every individual and respecting and promoting each and every individual as an individual rather than as a group of employees or a pod of SVPs or a pod of copywriters. That allows us to be extremely high touch with people, individuals. And so I take care of 800 people. That is my job. I oversee people and experience, talent, recruiting, the HR functionality, global expansion, learning, development, culture, you name it. I get that honor of doing that every single day. And I have incredible lieutenants that are much wiser than me in certain areas that really drive it through. So I have a vision for what I want to create and how I want people to feel here on a daily basis and on an hourly basis. And I work with a great team and also a leadership team that helps me implement and scale that on a global level. How was that?
Yeah. That's
I take care of people.
Exactly.
Hold space, take care of, listen.
And what an incredible job that is.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. And I know Matt and Jill have some questions for you, so I'll let them fire away before they kill me.
Okay.
Well, Claude and I know each other, and we are friends, and I can vouch for the incredible female leader and human being that she is. And so it is so much fun to have a friend and colleague on the show. So thank you for joining us, Claude.
Thank you.
The question that I think most of our listeners would be interested in is there are probably people who do this kind of work undercover at a lot of companies, but it takes a certain amount of bravery and intention for a company to actually name a person the chief heart officer and actually have a leader in the organization who gets to talk about his or her job the way that you do. That it's really, I've heard you say, it's my job to take care of 800 hearts. And that is far more on what you and I would call the human side of business than other. And so I'm curious about how that came to be and what advice you might give to other people in other companies that are doing this kind of work but may not be able to get it substantiated.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jill. I love the question. So first things first, not all companies have a CEO that blesses culture like we do. And so I really want to acknowledge that. That's the first thing. I think without Gary as CEO and without this being an independent agency, we might not have the carte blanche to brand a head of HR as Hart. So that is first and foremost. I want to just put that there and give a nod to Gary. So we're a very different agency. We really, people say they put people first, and I get it. And I've been at those agencies where we have that written on the wall.
Yeah.
The cool thing is we don't have that written on the wall for one reason. A, it's something that we just want coming out of our water fountains and in our DNA. We want people to actually feel it rather than me put it on a wall and be like, that's our culture. That, I think, right there is very special because we're not drilling and driving something down someone's, cup every single day to believe. We are actually walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And it goes to the other part of the question that you mentioned, which is there are thousands and thousands of people just like me and just like you at these companies that have the day job and that sprinkle the fairy dust as I did and as you did. What I was lucky enough to do is I was able to balance both of my roles, the paid for role and the non-paid for role. And at one point, it was just very obvious that the smile on my face was a permagrin every time I was deploying the heart to my teams, rather than getting I do this all the time, but rather than getting a client or a consumer to buy more of this. There's tons of people that can do this too. And I did this very well because I'm fascinated by humans and human behavior and trained as a psychologist. So, figuring out how to get this into your hands and that there's a divot in it so you can hold it in your palm and so forth and so on. That's all very exciting. But training people and seeing people and teams light up when someone pays attention to how they learn, how they hear things, their trials and tribulations and their roadblock, I think is something very, very different. And it's a skill that I have and a skill that I really want to, I want to scale. And I wish I had the magic potion right now to say, this is how you go do it and this is how you get heard. What I can say for sure is to make sure that you take up space, that anyone out there that feels as though they have an inclination to be more heart, don't shy away from that. That's a strength. You've heard me say many times now, I really want to put away the term soft skills because I think it is a detriment to those of us that lean more right-brained. I really do. They're necessary life skills. That is something that we want to be proud of. We teach necessary life skills here, just as we're teaching people how to place ads on Facebook, how to write more comedic copywriting, how to get better with operations, whatever it is. So be proud of the fact that if you have these necessary life skills, like shine it. They will get seen because everyone is thirsty for them. Everyone. And if someone says that they're not, they're just lying. They're hiding. So that was a roundabout way of answering both of your questions. Hopefully it was clear enough to get the answer.
I think it was great. One of the things that I really love to do on the show is try to put Matt on the spot. It's one of the things that brings me great joy. And so Matt, I'm curious, how does this play out at YISC? Where does the heart and culture piece play in, and how do you leverage your human resources team to be sure that this type of culture is respected and is pervasive?
Sure. Happy to answer questions as always, Jill. A real pleasure. So I guess for me, perhaps I was an engineer in a past life, because I tend to view HR in a couple different layers. And I think that you have to start with a foundational layer that talks to process, talks to compliance. I get it. It's not everyone's favorite cup of tea, but the reality is we do have legal implications in our department, privacy legislation, we do investigations, et cetera. So I think it's first and foremost important to lay a solid foundation. We've elected to lay that foundation at YISC through technology, believing that automating those manual repetitive tasks actually frees up finite resources to focus on culture. So I've been in a lot of organizations where we try and do both. We try and manage a manual HR function and also try and institute culture into the organization through engagement initiatives or through learning initiatives. And we end up doing not a great job at either because we're spread so thin. So in this organization, I wanted to change how we did things, and I had the great privilege of building it from the ground up. And therefore, we built a foundation of technology so that with a limited amount of headcount, we were able to say, okay, if we only have X amount of FTE, where are we going to spend those resources to have the biggest bang for your buck in terms of what's going to add value in the long-term horizon? I'm not the kind of person who likes to fix repetitive, reactive type issues. I like to solve root causes, and let's try and engage and enhance and teach our colleagues. Let's try and get them involved in learning and social activities and cultural activities and charitable activities. And that's really hard to do if you're managing sheets and sheets of paper and looking at 5 screens of Excel spreadsheets. So I think the first part, Jill, I would say again, is that foundation of process and technology to build from. And then the fun stuff for me is, let's talk about learning. Let's talk about succession. Let's talk about recognition. Let's talk about culture. That for me is fun. But the reality is, if you don't fix that first part, you never get to the second part.
I hear what you're saying, Matt, and I think it's a really interesting take that on the sort of approach that gets you to the same outcome. I think about the past few jobs I've had, and as you know, I recently left a head of HR job at a large retailer in New York, and several retailers before that. And the conversation about culture versus resources has constantly it seems to be a conversation that companies think are at odds with one another, and I see it differently. To me, to allow human beings to, use Claude's words, to take up space, there is no limit to resources there. It's really about getting the managers to learn and inculcate the culture themselves. And it's not the job of HR, which is why I think a lot of HR teams are trying to change their name. Because 10 years ago, these issues would exist on teams, and people would call the HR team and say, hey, can you come and fix this? But the issue is, I can't fix what's happening in your house, it's your house. So I'm working with some clients right now who are desperate to make changes to their culture, and they want to add HR people to their team. And I'm actually suggesting to them, don't do that. Instead, work vigorously with your management team to build with them the culture and the home and the environment that you want your people to live in, and let your managers be the people that manage, maintain, and share that culture across your company.
Well, and I would add, Jill, I think a lot of people in our profession complain a lot about lack of resources. So, go to any HR roundtable, any HR function, ask for a show of hands who has enough resources. The answer is nobody.
Right.
And that's a reality. So you can go about that 2 ways. You can sit in those rooms and share war stories and talk about how you don't have the resources, or you can fix it. And the way we've chosen to fix it is to find efficiencies within our department that allow us to be more effective. And I would say it's a two-part conversation. So the first part is you need to find the areas for efficiency. And the second part, which I think is the most important part, is you need to negotiate with the business that if you realize savings through those efforts, that you can retain a portion of that savings and spend it on those cultural initiatives that you talked about. So in our organization, the first 2 years, we had a 100% rule, which was every dollar that we were able to save in HR, we could reinvest it back in other activities, recognition programs, engagement programs. But that's because we didn't have an HR function before I joined. Now I would negotiate a 50-50 split. For every dollar I save, I want to keep 50 cents and reinvest it back into the employees, which, by the way, has a big benefit to the organization. But at the same time, I'm giving the CFO 50% back, and he's saying, great, thank you for doing that. So we create an incentive within the HR team to find ways to save time, money, resources, because they're incentivized, because they also want to do that second part of the work, which is the fun culture training work. But it's hard to do that when you're focused on those transactional tasks. So we create the model that incentivizes people to find savings so we can reinvest it, as opposed to saying, well, we just don't have resources, so I guess we can't be effective.
That's where I'm so excited about technology, because a lot of HR leaders are running away from it and they're scared of this new technology evolution, the digital transformation of HR. I'm like, you guys should be so excited, because finally you have all of the tools to automate these processes, so you can focus on the heart. You can focus on actually doing the things that make you smile and working with the employees, creating those initiatives. You're finally in a position you can do that. So embrace it.
Well, how many companies have like huge teams of business partners that are going out and manually talking to people in a one-to-one ratio?
Thousands of business partners in each company.
Where you're going to have AI today can identify pain points. It can tell you where you're going to have your hotspots. It's not a perfect system. It's not a panacea for all the world's problems. But if you have 50 or 20 business partners roaming around the country or around North America, if you were able to allocate those resources more effectively, then they actually can start to address proactive issues, as opposed to Jill's earlier comment, which is they're firefighting. They're waiting for the phone call, they're hopping on the next plane or the next rental car, and they're going to fix somebody else's problem. I don't think that's the role of what we have to do, and that's why we've tried to rebrand the function through technology, then also the use, Chris, of predictive analytics, which tells us in the future where we're going to have challenges, so we can proactively address those pain points before they blow up. And that's a very powerful conversation for us to have with our business partners. In other words, we're saying, these three factors, 85% of the time is going to equal this result. Let's fix this now before it becomes a big issue. So we're actually providing incremental value to the business, not just cleaning up somebody else's mess.
Yeah. That's a whole new world.
Let me ask I'm going to ask the provocative question. There are probably a lot of people who are experiencing these types of issues and see the opportunities, but they don't have the budget or the resources to go out and purchase technology, implement technology. And so they need to rely on the resources that they have in their people operations or HR team. So I asked Claude this question. As an agency in New York City, I know what the pace feels like and how it feels to work in a company like that. What kind of measurement do you use, or have you been able to capture around this approach to HR?
To my approach, or to, yeah. So we use surveys. We've implemented radical candor feedback. So we're doing frequent, if not daily, feedback loops with managers. My team has now been trained on many of the leadership trainings that I've done in my past. So whether or not that's strength finders, we just went through predictive index, Myers-Briggs, of course. So we're still very, I would say, grassroots probably in our measurement. We've certainly looked at a ton of tools. I'm a little bit leery of technologicalizing what we have. We are without a doubt reverse engineering. I mean, we've created the culture, and we've created and continue to cultivate the culture on a daily basis, and we are reverse engineering now, kind of becoming bionic. We didn't start off with technology. We will end with having a wonderful coupling of people and technology. And we need that as we grow and we get more global, and we need enterprise solutions. But right now we do surveys. I speak with a lot of people on a daily basis, as you know. My KPI from Gary is to touch every single person in the agency and infuse the agency with empathy, which is the second part of that sentence. And so I spend a lot of time in one-on-ones. Today I'm going to be speaking to 45 interns. I'll be speaking to 20 clients later and figuring out how we have, if we have created client service folks that are deploying empathy to them. So are we able to take what we've created in here, which is pretty special, and are they feeling it? Because if they're feeling it, then ultimately the end consumer's going to feel it. And that's how we keep the lights on here. That's how I can pay for any of the technology that we need. But so it's extremely high touch. I mean, Gary is going to speak to probably 25 people and have one-on-ones with people today. So we collect hands-on data, look for patterns, and act very, very quickly.
I think it's important. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say that's a delicacy of having this specific type of agency. This specific agency where I have a CEO that's an operator that gives a shit about, Caroline's mom in the hospital, or Johnny getting engaged this past weekend, or Sammy getting a new puppy, or someone, crushing the new Budweiser ad. Like, that's pretty special. And I've never had that in any of the other agencies I've worked at. And the HR teams that I worked with didn't give a hoo-ha about what I was doing. So I want to do it differently.
I think it's important, amazing what you just said, because I think it's very important everyone listening understands that there is no quick fix, and technology is not going to solve this for you. Any successful leaders I speak to, like Claude, they're having hundreds, if not thousands, of one-to-ones. And that is the best way to get results, to understand that person, what motivates. Everyone different. Every single person you have that one-on-one with has a different set of needs, desires, etc. And you can't solve that through technology. So just to make sure everyone who's listening, we're not suggesting that you solve that through technology. Yeah, it's there to help you and as another tool to add to that.
I think what Matt said is spot on, and it's something that we look for all the time, which is how to create efficiencies and how to make sure that my team isn't spending 20 hours a week answering the same question over and over and over again. That there should just be an FAQ sheet on the intranet or whatever to say, like, how do I contribute to my 401k? Well, that shouldn't come into the HR alias anymore. So that is something that I absolutely believe in how technology can help us become more efficient and ultimately enjoy our jobs, because no one on my team wants to sit and answer that question.
Yeah,
well,
that's true.
Yeah. One thing I would say is just kind of recap. I think it's important for those listening on the show, what's watching right now, we're going technologizing people, it's the human experience, we should go in the other way. To recap, we talked about technology as the foundation. It's not everything. I think in Chris and Jill, half the shows we've had, we've talked about ATS platforms, and they've gone too far the other way. We've actually pursued efficiencies at the expense of the human experience. So now you see a lot of technology providers going the opposite way, including chatbots, including AI, to get that more personalized, customized experience, because candidates and HR managers alike aren't satisfied with the technology that's purely efficiency-based. So, but I also think it's important to recognize that the way I talk, by the way, is the language of the business. So if you haven't had a chance to connect with a board of directors or a CEO or a CFO, this is how they communicate. If I walk into a conversation and say, guys, I have the most amazing recognition initiative, it's going to cost $50,000. We're going to have this going on and that going on. In most organizations, they're going to go to you like, where's that money coming from? So what I lead with is, hey, we found these efficiencies in the business. It's going to save $100,000. Here's $50,000 back, CFO. I'm taking the remaining 50. I'm going to use it for this. And here's the ROI on that 50. Every time I have that conversation, it's a rubber stamp, and I'm out the door, and I'm doing that initiative. Whereas if I led with the qualitative, I may not have the same result. And that's just trial and error. And I have the scars on my back from 20 years of doing this to show that when you lead with that quantitative conversation, and Claude's bang on, it really does depend on the audience. I, as like Claude, have not worked in a lot of organizations where the heart comes first. It's generally the P&L comes first, and the heart is a nice thing that you can do if you can afford it.
Fluffy.
I just find ways to afford it, and then we move forward.
Yep, and I'm with you, Matt.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think there's an interesting tie here, and a really interesting conversation, because people who are listening will likely fall on one end of the spectrum or the other, or somewhere in between. And a lot of it has to do with what Claude said earlier. It has to do with the leader that you are supporting and partnered to. So in my experience, I've had some leaders that are all about culture, team development first, and believe that that will lead to business results. And I've also, unfortunately, been partnered to leaders that really saw the bottom line first, and I had to change my approach. But that, quite frankly, is part of what led me out to do the work that I'm doing today. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about now, Claude, which is this shift.
Yeah.
There is a massive shift going on in the marketplace that is really my passion, which has led me to start my firm. After 21 years of being on the inside and feeling so strongly that the human piece of human resources, the human piece of business, is ultimately the one and only thing that will sustain companies and lead to success. And I kind of wanted to open the floor for you on that, because I've had amazing opportunities to hear you share your thoughts on that. And I thought it'd be great to get that onto the show today.
Thank you. Oh, well, I love speaking about that, especially with these red headphones on. So for me, I really want to say, before I go any further, I really want to acknowledge Matt and any other HR practitioner out there that doesn't work in an environment that I work in. And hasn't, I raised my hand, and I have not worked in HR for 20 years, trained psychologist, a little bit different. I chose not to go down the HR route. So I want to just acknowledge that. I think it's very important that, and I love the duality of how you had us both on the show today. For me, treating people well and treating people with respect is very common sense. Bottom line, nothing else matters to me. I believe that we lost our way in corporations, and we lost our way in life in many ways, in that we come into an office for 8 to 10 hours a day, and we don't treat our coworker like we would treat our friend. We don't treat our coworker as we would treat our cousin or our aunt or our uncle, or the person that we pick up our dry cleaning from, whatever it is. That, to me, is fundamentally where that's the beginning, middle, and end of everything. How we treat people. I think that there is an enormous thirst for what you and I talk about every single day, Jill, because HR and corporations have been sterilized in many ways. They've been asked to, I don't think they volunteered to be policemen. I think they have been asked to be litigators and lawyers and policemen and follow the dotted line, and quite frankly, not have personalities and not show their heart and not care. That's the craziest thing for me to comprehend, is how we have asked people to literally not care, but to just get them to sign the severance piece of paper. That's like, I understand how that happened, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that's where the idea of courage and vulnerability comes out for me in this particular moment. We all have lives, man. We all have beating hearts. We all have husbands and wives at home. We all have kids. We all have issues and problems and joys and everything. We come into this work and we just pretend that we don't. We just put it all in the back seat. It doesn't make sense to me. So I think now there's a defrosting happening in society, certainly in the American culture. Many of us see that we've gone to an extreme, and we need to come back to what matters, which is human beings and care and courtesy and respect and tenderness and kindness and gratitude. And I see that we have an opportunity here to change the paradigm that has been set for decades and decades and decades. This new generation of millennials and Gen Z right behind them are changing the world. They are asking us to be better human beings. And thus we need to, in order to retain them, or let me just rephrase, in order to even get them to look at us and create the experience and retain them, we must be better. And we can be better because we all are better when we leave work. We all go out for that drink with our friends and go pick our kids up from school, and go play, patty cake until 8 o'clock at night. Like, we do that. And I just think we lost our way. So I'm extremely passionate about this idea of creating space where people feel connected, where they can, I'm not even going to say bring their whole selves to work or best selves to work. I just want that to just be. I want to have a place where people feel they can be. They feel physically safe and psychologically safe. They feel it's okay to be a different race, creed, sexuality, orientation, political, whatever. And that it's okay, you know? And that's something that I strive to do here on a daily basis and have always been driven to do, whether I was coaching a soccer team, running my surfing company, working at Publicis London, not in HR. Treating people as human beings. And it's time. I mean, the gap is closing.
We speak of that a lot on the show, don't we, guys? That the companies that don't make that shift they're not going to have the future talent. As you said, the power is now in the employee, the people looking for the jobs now. It's not the other way around. And the companies don't provide that environment, they're not going to be able to attract that as talent, let alone retain it, as you said, Claude, as well. It's very, very important. And I was discouraged from being, it's funny, when I was the youngest manager in the company. I was 21 in the business. And I was discouraged by my CEO to even be friends with my employees. I was discouraged to go for a drink. I was discouraged to, Chris, you got work here, you got friends here. And I always found that really tough because my own personality, I naturally want to get to know people. I'm spending 90%, 80% of my day in an office with these people, more than I spend with my family in most cases. Most of us spend more time at work than we do with our friends and family, let's be honest. And I can't build meaningful relationships, and I can't let them be, I can't be vulnerable. That was the main one. I can't be vulnerable and letting them know I am a human behind it, being their director. I always found that really hard when I was working in the corporate world. So definitely needs to be a big change. It has to happen.
Yeah, I think that there's no surprise to me that you look on Instagram, you look on LinkedIn, you look no matter where you are online these days, and you see inspirational quotes and motivational quotes. Right. And it's not the old quote of Dale Carnegie with an eagle on the it's us writing it. It's us saying, like, you know, what we believe leadership to be. And each of us has probably a little bit of a different slant on that. But I think we're all saying similar things because we're all craving a change in the paradigm. It's no wonder that we're bringing more psychology into, more mindfulness into the workplace and more discussions about mental illness. I mean, look at what's happening. And I believe it's our job as people leaders to lead the charge and to create champions to do it with us.
And I think it's so great that we're all kind of pulling on the same rope, but I want to acknowledge that I think there's multiple ways to address that particular challenge. And I think it's a big problem that can't have enough resources and enough energy and enough passion put up against it. And I think the difference, you know, and I wish, Claude and Jill, that my approach was more like yours. I mean, I wish I was more vulnerable as an individual. It's just not in my DNA to be that naturally warm. It's something that I'm working on. Mm-hmm. Kind of the analogy that I use is there's a lot of individuals in this space that are having a philosophical conversation about right versus wrong. And I don't know that it's binary, but I also don't know that that approach is effective with all stakeholders. So how I've elected to manage my career over the last 20 years is, rather than stand outside of a wall and kind of picket, if you will, the change, I'm in the compound behind enemy lines, having a conversation and influencing the decisions that are being made on the outside. So, you know, I talk a lot about technology and data and project management and very quantitative pieces. Let's be very, very clear. Spoiler alert, it's a Trojan horse. I'm having a conversation about that to get credibility, to influence on the cultural piece, because once I have that credibility, I can pivot and introduce other elements. And then I'm picking up a phone and I'm calling a Claude Silver or a Jill Cass and saying, okay, now that I'm here, what do I do? because that's the piece where I'm always looking for best practices and always looking for inspiration, because I agree we have an epidemic when it comes to mental health. I think business and work has a role to play in, one, creating that, but also fixing that. And I take that really, really seriously. So I just love the fact that there's a lot of people standing up and saying, okay, we've gone too far. Put the brakes on this. We have to go the opposite direction. And I think however individuals who are watching this show choose to influence that, keep doing that, because we need more of you helping us through this challenge, because at the end of the day, we're fighting for people like us.
Well, Matt, this is part of why I treasure this show so deeply. Just the opportunity I have to talk with you guys every week. And I think what has emerged, which is that, Matt, you and I both have 20 years leading large HR organizations. We've both been relatively successful at doing it, and we come from different approaches. And I think that in itself is such an important learning for the people that get to, see or listen to our show, which is there are many ways to find success in this field and many approaches. And to me, some of the best takeaways are that we all need each other. You can't get success by just doing it my way, your way, his way, her way. We all need each other. And that is the human piece of the approach, which is we want to start seeing the world and workplaces as more holistic, as all of the different ingredients that come into humanity and all the different approaches. And so I need people like you similarly, because I have been in plenty of corporations where it was the data first. And I have not always had leaders or business partners that had Gary's perspective. And so I've had to also play it a little bit differently. But to Claude's comment about vulnerability, and I think that this is a beautiful tie across the entire conversation, the big word that's been on my mind lately is the word permission. And particularly for those of us that are in our age group, as it were, I do like to share on the show that I'm 27.
Why not?
I have been for a few years. But what is interesting to me is, the generations that are going through the workforce today, and those of us that are in this cohort are trapped, because many of us were raised in business by people who had a different perspective. I was raised by the people that Claude is talking about that said, Jill, in order for you to be a successful HR leader, you need to stop caring. You need to be able to go in and terminate people and go home and eat ziti for dinner. And I couldn't do it, because every time I had to have one of those conversations, I couldn't sleep. And that never changed for me. And so I am going through this process where I have needed to give myself permission and acknowledgement and validation that I still can be a very successful and influential leader in the space, but proceed with what is inside of me. And I think that with Gen Z coming through, my children alone are educating me every day on how I need to see the world. I see your little smile over there, Matt. 4 screens. So I think a lot about permission, needing each other during this really critical shift in the workplace.
I think one thing we haven't spoken about, definitely agree with you, Jill, is that when you give people permission to be vulnerable, that's when they're at their best. Like if you talk about innovation, companies now are like encouraging failure, like please fail, because if you're not fail, you're not moving forward, and giving people permission to go beyond and experiment. And that's where people get excited. That's where they are highly engaged, and they don't have that fear that if I fail, I'm going out the door, whereas now we're in a really unique situation where I know a lot of companies are moving in this direction of like, if you're not failing, then you're not actually moving forward. And companies need to create that safety net and that environment where everyone feels that they can do that. We have it here. We have a daily meeting every morning, 9 a.m. and I had to ask the team what I could do better and what we can do better as a team. And a lot of times I don't like the answer because it's like you're doing it wrong, right? But some of our best innovations and what we've done have come out of just asking even the new guys, right, who've been there for a week, who have this fresh perspective. They're not been here for a while, and they can come in with a different look, come up with the best ideas to do it. And I encourage the guys to fail and go out there and try new things. as well. And I think that's part of it that we haven't spoken about. And if when people think about this, they see it as fluffy, but it's not at all. Because if you give people permission to do that, the value, the new product, the new innovation that can come out of that can transform your organization. So I think that's something people need to think about.
Chris, I mean, I sign me up, totally with you. The thing I think the nomenclature is really interesting. So I'm the one that brought up the topic of vulnerability before we got on. I was like, that's what I think I want to talk about today. I'm recognizing that some words are toxic to people and it's kryptonite to people. And so like soft skills, I think soft skills is kryptonite to people. I think I used the word underdog the other day in a podcast, and then I got on Instagram stories and said, you know what? I don't want to use that word anymore because I think that is degrading. And so I have to wonder if words like failing or vulnerability already are just like, no, I don't want to talk about it. No, I'm not vulnerable. I'm super, it's like, we just are. We're just who we are. Whether or not you want to say you're vulnerable, you're thoughtful. Mm-hmm. But it is really interesting, I think, as we get into more of this kind of, as we become, I'm going to just use this phrase, as we bring more positive psychology, quite frankly, into our workspaces and start to demystify the human experience, and we start to promote happiness and wellness and well-being and autonomy and articulation and whatnot. I think it might be worthwhile to think of new verbiage and new nomenclature that might bring someone like a Matt into a conversation who said, like, you know what, I just don't show my vulnerabilities. Maybe that word doesn't work for Matt. Maybe there is something, the Matts of the world. Maybe there are other words that would be more applicable for some to feel more open and willing to just be.
A word I keep thinking about, Claude, as you talk, and for those who haven't had a chance to see some of your other content, I would really, guys, encourage you to Google Claude Silver, some great content. I always challenge myself to expose myself to individuals that think about things differently. And when you talk about vulnerability, I hear authenticity.
Yeah,
that's the word I'm going for, because I think authenticity does include aspects of, you don't know everything all the time. And sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you say silly things. Sometimes you goof up. And I think authenticity is a word that I strive for personally and try and reinforce with the team here, because I think it's really, really critical. And to touch on a previous comment that Jill made about terminations, if you're an HR practitioner and you terminate people for a living and it's ever transactional and emotionless for you, get out of HR.
Yeah.
Leave. Now, go do something else. And then if you want to come back, do that. But the moment this becomes an impersonal, cold process, you're doing a disservice to yourself, to the organization, and most importantly, to the other person across the table from you. So I've done this for 20 years. There's never been an easy conversation. Like you, Jill, I don't sleep well the night before. I don't sleep well the night of or the night after, because you're impacting somebody's life. Yeah. And whether or not they deserved it or not, most people aren't well positioned to be able to handle a reality where they don't have an income. So I always take that piece really, really, really seriously. And I think to Jill's earlier point, we've been coached and counseled to have this separation of emotionless HR person, very transactional. And I think that's doing a disservice to corporate America and to, frankly, the world.
It's funny. It's actually not funny at all. But recently I bumped into a person who, unfortunately, I had to terminate from one of the companies I worked for. And this person was known to be one of the more challenging executives in the organization. And when it came time for this person's last day, they asked me to come in and have the conversation, because I had been the only HR leader who had been able to create a really truly human bond with this person. And when we had the exit conversation, I actually became emotional, because I had tremendous respect for everything this person had given to the organization. And I knew what it was going to mean for this person to lose a job. And so it was a very hard conversation for me. Well, fast forward, I ran into this person at a big event in New York City about 3 months later. And I saw the person from across the room and I thought, oh God, I haven't seen the person since that meeting. Well, this person came up to me, threw arms around me, and then in a large group of people said, "This is Jill Katz. She let me go X months ago. And it was the most loving conversation I've ever had. If you ever need an HR person, you should call Jill." And I was floored because here I was, the person who had the most awful conversation with this person. I ended up crying because I felt so horrible and just wanted to see success for this person. And that authenticity or that vulnerability made an impression. And so I appreciate, Matt, your comment there. And I agree wholeheartedly. Every HR person I've ever coached who's had to go through a reduction or termination conversation, I've said to them, if you're nervous or you feel bad or you're struggling, that's good. Don't be afraid to show that, because someone's about to lose a job.
It's something that's not spoken about enough as well, I think. Something I tried to uncover on the podcast, and I was shocked by it myself, because that started coming up on the podcast now and again, those sleepless nights you have when you go home. I spoke to a CHRO recently that had to let go of 30,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
Like 30,000. And I, after the podcast, I had to take a moment myself to understand what I just heard. And I sat there and I was like, 30,000 people had just been let go. And
30,000 families affected.
Exactly. And people don't think about it. And she was, I'm not going to mention the name, but she was telling me, Chris, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get home. I can't stop thinking about it. That's the part that no one really talks about. And you don't read that in the HR magazine, guys. You don't see that on the LinkedIn post. Mm-hmm. And for the people that are studying to be in this field, they need to understand that's going to be part of the role. And that is very, very tough. And as you said,
we were talking to us before the show, about, the function of HR oftentimes we're parachuted into a situation that has gone off the rails in a lot of cases. People have tried to intervene, people have tried to mediate, and then it hasn't worked. So we get involved. And oftentimes, I think in more cases than not, somebody's not happy with the result. And we are the person who is facilitating that conversation and that result. And either we're not strong enough and people think that HR is ineffective, and you see lots of posts about, I filed a claim of harassment, HR didn't have my back, et cetera, or we went too hard and then it's the company's too punitive and HR is heartless. It's a really difficult balance to strike in the role that we're in. And I think that, to your point, Chris, for anybody considering this as a profession, you have to understand that, despite the fact you're working with people all of the time, and that's one of the great parts about the job, sometimes people aren't going to be your biggest fan. And sometimes that's okay, but you have to be able to, as a professional, understand that and learn how to manage that yourself. And whether that's talking to friends or colleagues or other people in the profession or a psychologist, you have to be able to reconcile those feelings, because when you want to go in and make a real positive difference and yet you walk away feeling like you failed 50% of that conversation, it can be really, really, really challenging. So I appreciate what Jill had to say earlier around just having that emotional reaction to an individual, because you generally want people to do well, and sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Well, guys, we can go on for another half an hour we never managed to make it half an hour, guys. But it just shows how passionate you are about what you do, right? And despite the fact that we kind of ended on that topic, it's a very, very, very important one. So I'm really happy that came up in today's conversation. So, but before we wrap up, I suppose I'll ask you this question, Claude, first. What advice would you give? Parting piece of advice would you give to other leaders out there that want to, think differently, look at the heart of and try and reach their employees? What advice would you give to them?
I think the first one, Chris, is to look inside and see if there's anything that is limiting them from being authentic, being a human. I think that's the first thing, because we all have a mask. We all have limiting beliefs that prevent us from doing X, Y, or Z. So look inside. I think asking questions, talking to people like Matt, Jill, and others, how they do it is really, really important, and getting the different sides of the coin as you have here and the guests. So, but know thyself. I mean,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's something that we all strive to do until our last breath, and there's no better time than today to start.
Jill?
Today's conversation was really meaningful to me. So thank you, Chris and Matt and Claude. I think that as I work to help people with this shift alone, I would say give yourself permission. I would say be able to let go of what you were taught and instead follow what you know in your gut is the right thing to do.
And last but not least, Matt.
I had two things in my head. They both were just mentioned. So thank you, Claude and Jill.
It always happens whenever you're lost, right? This is why I'm sorry,
I
Matt.
was thinking, like, you said all about what's within, and I thought, okay, Claude said that, fantastic. I'm going to pivot, talk about know thyself, and then Jill said that. I'm like, okay. Here's what I would say is, give yourself a break.
Yeah.
In this profession, it is not. This is not an easy profession to choose. This is not, for leaders, and generally speaking, in today's reality, we are building a plane while we're flying it. We're in between two eras right now, regardless of industry, regardless of profession, regardless of function. We're in between two worlds. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, join the club. Be okay with that, and be okay with yourself in the sense that you're going to make mistakes, but surround yourself with really caring, thoughtful, pragmatic, but also caring people that are going to help you in times when you're going to need it, because I promise you, you will.
Fantastic. Well, look, that's all for today, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Claude, for coming along and joining our crazy group.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thanks always to Matt and Jill. We actually couldn't do it without you. Love you having you guys on the show. And for everyone that tuned in, all the show notes will be linked on the website, on the podcast. If you want to go back in there, everything will be there. And look forward to seeing you all the same time next week.